No, man, but you got to keep going. What am I going to do, quit? That's not an option. You got to keep on keeping on. Life's a garden, dig it? You make it work for you. You never give up, man. That's my philosophy.
Hey gardeners, hope you're having a wonderful week. Kind of a chilly morning this morning here, but check out this zucchini. Amazing. This is actually probably one of the first squash I've grown in a while that actually hasn't really succumbed to any powdery mildew or anything, and is still really putting out late in the season here. I mean, this one's maybe a little big, but we'll be sure to come back here in the next couple of days. It's supposed to warm up a little bit, so these will grow just a little bit more. We'll get these ones just a little bit younger. All right, let's get growing. All right, gardeners. Welcome to Let's Get Growing, your weekly gardening livecast here on the Urban Gardener channel. I'm Enoch, I'm your host, and we've got a really fun show for you today. We got with us Cindy Tobeck, master gardener of giant pumpkins and other giant vegetables and fruits and all of that. We're going to talk with her about growing these big, huge, giant vegetables. So that's going to be a real fun conversation here coming up in just a little bit. So be sure to stay tuned with us here. And yeah, if you are joining with us, be sure to give us a like right up here at the top of the show. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and be sure to share our show with all of your friends. And you can also see what we've got growing on at our website, letsgetgrowing.live. And if you're here with us and joining with us right now, be sure to ask a question or comment in the comment section there. If you have any questions for our guests, we'd love to feature them right here on the show. And also, great way to support our show is to support our sponsor, Ivy Organics. And you can use our promo code GROW10, GROW10, in their store. And then also, we really encourage everybody to come and join with us in our gardening group, the Let's Get Growing group on Facebook. We've got all sorts of great gardeners in our gardening community. We'd love for you to come and join with us and share all of your gardening adventures on our group there. There's a link down below in the description. And it's a really great way for you to be able to share your gardens with me as I share my gardens with you here on our channel, the Urban Gardener. So it gives me an opportunity to be able to see what you've got growing on in your gardens. So join with us in our group there and share with me what you've got growing on. And also, real quick here, also at the top of the show, I want to give a huge shout out to all of you who are watching our show on the replay. I know a lot of you watch this show on replay, so I want to make sure I'm acknowledging all of you as well too. And if you are watching us on the replay, be sure to get down to the comment section. Let us know you're here. Let us know what you got growing on, and if you have any questions or anything like that too. I encourage everybody also to use the comment section down below to give us any suggestions or anything that you have for the show, any future guests you might like to see on the show. As you know, we've got and had so many really awesome guests on our show over this first year of the Let's Get Growing show. So many great, awesome guests that we've had. So let me know if there's anybody on your wish list for our show. So get down in the comments and let us know that as well too. So yeah, it's been a really kind of great week here. I have to admit, right at the top of the show as well, too, our little introduction that we do there, where I was showing you my zucchini plant, was actually last week's introduction, and somehow I mixed them up and ended up repeating last week. So I just used that one for this week. And so last week was actually kind of a warmer week. We did have just a little bit of a couple of cool nights there. As you could tell by the plant, it was kind of like weakening up from a little bit of the cold that we had. It wasn't really much of a frost quite yet, but we did actually over the last like few days get some pretty cool nights and had some really pretty good frosts overnight and killed off a lot of the plants. And so thankfully that's kind of what we've been doing in working in the gardens, is just kind of pulling out the last of what we've got and the last of what we've been growing. Lots of the tomatoes, we pulled a bunch of the green ones that it looked like they're just about to go ripen and all of that. So we'll be ripening up some green tomatoes and saving some seeds from some other ones that I kind of left on the plants a little bit longer so I could save some seeds from them. So we've been doing that. I did have actually, we were cleaning up one of my garden beds this last week, and as well as, harvesting everything up and pulling all of the plants that have been kind of killed off by all of the frost. And I had this really kind of like busy part of my garden bed where I just had a bunch of things growing and I just kind of let them go. And so we were pulling all the plants and pulling them up, and I noticed potatoes in the soil. And I hadn't grown potatoes there since the year before in this one area, and I must have left some behind, some smaller ones behind, and they grew some volunteer potato plants in my garden. And so it was kind of one of those kind of fun things to find. I wasn't expecting it. I thought we pretty much got everything out of there. We were cleaning up the garden bed, and lo and behold, there were a bunch of really good sized potatoes too. I was really surprised about how many we got and how big they actually were, and that they were actually grew there this whole season without me even noticing that they were there at all. So it was really awesome, to be able to get a really cool harvest of potatoes right off the bat. So yeah, and again, um, thanks to everybody for joining with me here this week too. And also I want to thank Jay for joining with us here as well too, moderating our comment section there. And again, I want to encourage everybody to get in there and ask some questions and leave some comments and that sort of thing as we go through the show as well too. So yeah, and let me know too what you've got growing on in your gardens. I'd love to hear all about what you've got growing on as well too. Are you pulling out all of your plants in your gardens right now as well too because of frosts? Or are you lucky and you're living just a little more further south and you still got a lot of things growing in your garden as well too? So I'm kind of in the in between. We did kind of get to stretch out and grow things for just a little bit longer than normal this season, but frost did finally come and hit us and take out most everything as well too. So now it's pretty much just getting ready and keeping a few things. We've got some greens that we're keeping covered up. I've got some spinach and greens and different things like that on our back patio and some of our elevated beds that I've got some covering for that I use. So we keep some of that stuff covered up, and we continue to grow some of that as well too. But for the most part, all of the other areas of our garden are pretty much getting closed down, and I'm really waiting for my trees out front. One of them is already dumping most of its leaves, and they kind of take their turns. The one on the left takes its turn and dumps all the leaves first, and then the one on the right dumps all of its leaves. So here over the next week, I'm sure that most of the leaves from this one will actually start falling off the tree, and then I can really start collecting them. And then we mulch them down and use them around the different garden beds that we're clearing up this week from all of our frosts, and pulling all the plants out. So we'll kind of cover all of our beds and all of our places like that, as well as some of the areas where we've been planting out our garlic over the last couple of weeks too. So I was talking a little bit about that last week, where we were planting out most of the garlic that I had for right here in our garden beds here. But I also this last week went over to my friend's place where we're growing in these big 20 by 40-foot plots. We've got two of them. One of them we're going to cover for this winter, and then we're going to grow a few things some more greens and things like that as well too throughout the wintertime in the front plot. And as well, we planted out our garlic for this next year too, and ended up with like nearly 300 garlic plants planted out. So it's going to be something to see all of those. And the amazing thing about that too, and I think I mentioned this as well in one of our past shows, is that all of the plants that we're planting all came from just a couple of bulbs just 4 years ago. It's just really amazing how those can multiply just exponentially in the long run. And here we are like 4 years later, and I've planted out 300 cloves in this garden plot for this next year. So it's going to be fun to see those plants come up. And again, too, we're waiting for those. And we talked about this with Gardener Scott the other week too, is that we're kind of going to wait for our garlic to kind of sprout up out of the ground. We should have, still several weeks before we have any really hard freezes in wintertime. It's still, a little ways off. So we'll get some garlic sprouted up. And when they've sprouted out a few inches too, I'll take some of that leaf mulch as well that I'll be saving to cover those beds and kind of protect the soil there as well. But I want to wait until they sprout up a little bit before I cover them, because I'm using leaf mulch. If you're using other things like straw, things like that are fine, but leaves tend to just really kind of bound together and really stick together when it starts to rain. And at that point can really, make it harder for the garlic leaves to kind of sprout up through the ground, depending on how thick your leaves are. Really, some of them will poke right through, but if it's really thick, it can really kind of keep them from sprouting out. And I like to pile my leaves on, so I'll just wait until they're a few inches and then do that as well too over this next week as we start collecting a lot of our leaf mulch and all of that. So I see Christopher from Norway joining with us. Christopher, awesome to see you there. Thank you for joining with us. And again, thanks everybody else for joining with us here. We're going to get with our guest here, Cindy Tobeck, here in just a minute. But real quick, a little something from Ivy Organics, and then we'll be back and we'll talk to Cindy Tobeck. Let's Get Growing is sponsored by Ivy Organic.
Ivy Organic brand products are innovative, organic, effective, and USA made products to help make this your best growing season. Hi, my name is Charles Malky, biologist and plant expert with Ivy Organics, where we grow cool plants and author Saving the World with the Home Garden. Ivy Organic brand products has a product for you, whether you be an organic orchard or a backyard grower that's trying to do things right. Ivy Organics has a product for you. Ivy Organic all-purpose fertilizers are unlike most fertilizers on the market in the sense that it has all 6 plant macronutrients. These are nutrients that plants need in abundance. Most people are just focused, and most people have only been trained to focus on the NPK, but Ivy Organic brand fertilizers deliver all 6 plant macronutrients, which include your nitrogen for your greening and growth, phosphorus for flowers and fruit, and also in the summertime helps with the drought resistance of the plant. Potassium, important for root development, disease resistance, and then the other 3 macronutrients that Ivy Organic all-purpose fertilizers have include magnesium, which is the heart of the chlorophyll molecule, sulfur, important for the greening and the metabolic processes within the plant, and number 6, and actually about 1/3 of the plant's weight, is calcium.
All right, everybody. Today's featured guest, as I mentioned, is Cindy Tobeck. She grows giant pumpkins, long gourds, all sorts of giant vegetables. So let's welcome Cindy Tobeck to the show. Hi, Cindy. Welcome to Let's Get Growing. Thanks for joining with us today. Oh, let's make sure we can hear her. Oh, there we go. Again, thank you. Sorry there. Thanks for joining with us.
Good morning, Enoch. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, awesome, excellent. Yeah, so I've been wanting to have you on the show, and I thought it would be kind of the perfect time of year because I'm sure that you've pretty much wrapped up all of your weigh-ins for the year. So we're kind of at the end of the season. So how did everything kind of go this year as far as what you were expecting and how it turned out and all of that?
This year was a different year for me. The previous 2 years, I was really focused on being a master gardener. And for the Great Pumpkin Commonwealth, there's a program called the GPC Master Gardener Championship. And I was the previous 2 year world champion of that program. And that's where you have to have the biggest 5 giant varieties in the world, combined. And there's a way they score that and everything. And so I set a Guinness World Record with that. And the following year, had another successful Master Gardener patch. And this year, I wanted to get away from that, put that in the rearview mirror, and focused on primarily giant squash. And so I grew 4 giant Atlantic giants, 3 squash and 1 pumpkin. And my goal was to try to grow the world record squash, be #1 squash grower in the world, and be the squash grower of the year for the Great Pumpkin Commonwealth. And so that's where I focused. I wanted to scale back this year quite a bit because I've also had this goal for a number of years on the back burner outside of gardening to backpack all the way around Mount Rainier, which is called the Wonderland Trail. And that takes at least a week to do. It took me 9 days to do 93 miles backpacking. And so having a master gardener patch, with that Wonderland Trail just wasn't going to work. So it kind of felt like a vacation this year, having just 4 Atlantic giant plants going.
Right.
And I was able to achieve a lot of goals. I did grow the #1 squash in the world for the 2nd year in a row. That world record was a little elusive for me, but having #1 was great. And then I am going to be the GPC Squash Grower of the Year for my for having the 3 biggest combined squash weights.
Wow, right on. That's then kind of goal met then, right? So you got that.
Yeah, pretty much.
Excellent, excellent. So what's the difference between, I guess, as far as like categories? Because most people are familiar, with the giant pumpkins, but
Right.
the difference between growing a giant squash specifically.
They're both Atlantic giants, and the giant squash just has a green gene, and otherwise they're pretty similar to growing. They tend to come out of the gate once you pollinate them a little bit faster, so they can be really exciting right after pollination because they tend to outgrow the giant pumpkins a little more rapidly. They being green, you want to keep them green because that's like the #1 rule when you show them, that they have to be 100% green, blue, or gray. And so shading of the fruit is really important, particularly when they're young and when they're old. And so I try to get them, unlike the giant pumpkins that I keep shaded with white sheets all season long, with the giant squash, I let them see the sun when it's not so intense, like early in the morning and in the late afternoon, early evenings, at the beginning and end of the season, to try to green them up a little bit more. Plus, I kind of think, with any plant tissue that's green, that's full of chlorophyll. And what does chlorophyll do? It photosynthesizes. So I tend to think that perhaps, I'm helping it photosynthesize, get more growth by giving it a little sun. So that's really the only difference with the giant squash, is you want to regulate how much sun they get with their shading.
Right. But they are a separate category as far as competition?
They are. They're still a Cucurbita maxima, Atlantic giant, but when you show them,
Yeah.
as far as GPC goes, they will be registered under the giant squash category. Many of the way-offs around the world, more and more of them, I'd say probably half of them now, include the giant squash in the giant pumpkin payouts, because the giant squash are getting bigger and they're able to compete with the giant pumpkins pretty well. And it helps to encourage squash growing. Giant pumpkins are more popular. They tend to be bigger just because they've got a greater genetic diversity and more people are breeding them. But having the giant squash in that giant pumpkin payout really encourages those of us who are growing them big to grow really big ones and get them out there.
Yeah, I find that really kind of fascinating. When I was looking into that and researching that just a little bit more, was, because I was just used to, and I've been to like several fairs and different things where you see the big giant pumpkins that people are growing and these different competitions, and, just always thought of them as the same, and then when I was researching it to see that there was a difference between the squash category and the pumpkin category. But again, very, very big fruits. And it's really
Yeah.
crazy how, you're able to, grow those and get those things so big. I mean, I've grown a pretty big pumpkin myself. I've made it to 132 pounds in one pumpkin, and that was huge for me.
It's bigger than me.
Yeah. And, and to think about, and I just grew that. I just let that grow pretty much. I didn't put much work into doing anything for that pumpkin. And then as I was researching and looking into growing for a competition, a separate type of competition, but that's when I started learning about these different categories and how they were between the squash and the pumpkins, but then also is learning what it takes really to get those giant pumpkins. I mean, you really got to put some work into growing those things.
You really do. And that's why, like I said, I wanted to scale back a little bit. All the giants take a lot of work, particularly the giant pumpkins and squash. Most growers who are serious about being competitive grow around 1,000 square feet. And when you're dealing with several plants with that big of a footprint, and you're pruning all of that and burying all those vines and maintaining, and fumigating, that is a lot of time invested every day. And so, it is a lot of work. It's like, I always say, it's like having, each giant pumpkin or squash plant is like having a toddler. So last year it was like I had 4 toddlers I was babysitting all at once. They just take a lot of time. It's worth it in the end. Frankly, growing giant pumpkins and squash, it pays very well. So if you're good at it, you can make some money and then reinvest and, hopefully get better the next year.
Yeah. How many different competitions do you take your pumpkins to? I mean,
I like
sure,
to go up and down the West Coast. This year, having scaled back somewhat, I went to a new one in California, Bishop's Pumpkin Patch, Hard Rock Cafe, National Pumpkin Way Off. That was a really fun one. And then I flew back immediately after that, right at the end of the awards ceremony, back to Seattle, and I had my pumpkin loaded up. I grew 1 pumpkin for competition, and that was already loaded up before I left for California. And then the next morning, after flying back, getting home at flying into SeaTac at midnight and getting home at 1 a.m. I took that the next morning to Washington's biggest way off, which is Carpenito Brothers Farm Pumpkin Way Off, and I won with that one. So California, immediately back-to-back doubleheader in Washington, And then I had another way off, Bauman Farms down in Oregon, where I took the #1 squash in the world and had that weighed. That was a lot of fun.
Wow, right on. That's got to be pretty fun watching those different competitions and taking them. But I mean, again, more work though too, because you got to load those things up and get them to these different places. You probably put them on trucks, right?
Yeah, this year I put them on my truck and my flatbed trailer. Sometimes it's a good problem to have when they don't fit in the truck. So I've got a flatbed car trailer that is my backup. That is probably for me
the trailer out, right?
Exactly. That's the most difficult part for me, is harvesting them and loading them up. It's very stressful. What I came to realize this year is that every single year I do something totally different than I had the previous year as far as my loading technique. The previous year I was using a lift, and a family member of mine had a lift that could reach into my greenhouses and pick them up that way and then lift them out, so I didn't have to dismantle greenhouses. That was new and a learning curve. The previous year I'd done something different. This year I did something different, but I think I'm going to stick with it. I really liked it a lot. I erected a small tripod over the pumpkin or squash in the greenhouse. It was 10 feet tall. And then I just barely lifted it off the ground. So you strap the pumpkin in with a harness, kind of made out of like seatbelt straps. You lift it up in the air with an engine hoist. And then I put a pallet underneath of that. And then underneath that pallet, I put a piece of plywood. I made a skid basically. And I lowered it back down onto that plywood skid. And then with my tractor, I just pulled it slowly out of the greenhouse, where I have a 15-foot tall quad pod. It's basically a tripod with 4 legs. Up at the top of that is an engine hoist. And with those really long legs, I'm able to lift that pumpkin up high in the air where I could back my truck or trailer underneath and carefully lower it back down. But that's always so stressful, lifting those things up in the air, because you don't want to drop them. I've dropped a couple in my time, because of rope failure or chain failure. And that's never any fun.
Do you put those straps or whatever beforehand? Do you grow anything, or they just grow and then you put them when you're getting ready to transport them? I mean, you let them just grow and grow and grow. They're naked all season long. And then when it's time to harvest them, then you fit them. It's called a pumpkin lifting ring. And you fit them with that ring and get all the straps adjusted, get your rope underneath cinched up nice and tight, and trust your knot. In my mind, I'm thinking like you got to have them like beforehand with something in there, and just have them, and you just have it ready to go. Have them grow on top of the straps or whatever.
No, they harness up pretty well, and a lot of people think that we grow them on pallets, and actually that's not true. If we did, they would grow off the pallet, and so and then the pallet also. It would overtake the pallet, and then also, with how big they get, they would, and how light we try to keep our soil, they would just drive that pallet into the ground, and so it would defeat the purpose. So most of us grow on what's called mill fabric, which is a really heavy duty woven plastic. It kind of reminds me of woven Kevlar. They use it in pulp mills as conveyor belt material. It's really slidey. And so the pumpkin can grow on that, and it slide across as it expands, and then it deters rodents from chewing up underneath of it. And then I do an additional step, and underneath my mill fabric, I put a half sheet of plywood, and I find that solid substrate makes the bottom of the fruit really, really flat. And that seems to keep them from splitting. You know, when they're growing 40 to 60 pounds a day in August, you want to do everything you can do to keep them from splitting. And I think that plywood really helps.
Yeah, I have enough issues just with my regular size squash and things from that in the garden, you know, having them split. To imagine having something that's you want to grow to that size. I mean, I'm sure that's just a constant worry every day. Like the splitting or even the stems breaking too. I'm sure that they can grow in certain ways that will cause a
Absolutely.
stem to snap or something too as well.
Yeah, I was growing one on a scale this year. It was the one I ended up taking to California. And that's kind of exciting to grow one on a scale. You can truly see the daily gains. You know, most of us just estimate the daily gains with a measuring tape, but to see the daily gains is fun. However, you know, that scale had a 5x5 sheet of plywood, you know, as the scale deck, and it started growing into its stem. And so before it got too terribly big, like when it was around 400 pounds, I had to lift it up before I couldn't lift it anymore, get that scale out of there, and then let it grow more into the dirt, where I dug a trench to make room for that stem to accommodate it. So they can pick themselves sometimes. You have to really be, if they're not doing that and their shoulders are growing higher and higher, you have to be really careful to let the vines be loose so that you don't get stem stress and cracks that away. Rodents are a huge problem for me. They came a month earlier than I was anticipating, and took one of my biggest and best one down.
Oh no. That's got to be horrible too. And again, you know, where it's bad enough in my regular garden where I'm just growing things and I could lose something to, say, some pests or some sort of thing like that, you know, and that's, you know, a real loss. But again, you're growing in this, you know, purposely in this, you know, competitive way, and you're trying to get this giant thing to grow. And you know, so again, you've got these constant worries, but to have something lost, you know, whether you're, like you said, dropping it at the very last moment because the strap wasn't on right or something, or a rodent comes along on your best prospective one. I mean, that's just got to be really disheartening.
It is. You put so much time and energy and, frankly, emotion into growing a giant. You know, they have such a big footprint. So many people can only grow one or two because that's all the space they have to work with. And when that one, or when, you know, when that one goes down, that's a huge loss. I mean, so much time, energy, money, and emotion goes into growing these. It's really heartbreaking when that happens. I had gone on my hike that I had mentioned around the trail, and right before I left, I saw that rodent damage, and the pumpkin was kind of growing, or the squash, it grew over its blossom end, and so it kind of grew like a pontoon, and so I could see underneath, and it was kind of just like looking like a pontoon boat underneath, and it had, you know, a cavity in there, and so you could see, well, the rodents, the mice thought that was like their new hidey hole, and they got in there and they chewed around the perimeter. And so before I left for my Wonderland hike, I saw that damage. I got in there and bleached that area, got a box fan pointed in there, and then I thought before I left, you know, I'm going to also set some live traps, because that's what I had, and put some cayenne pepper around there, and that helped any more from coming in. But when I got back 9 days later from my backpacking trip, it was still, because of the humidity in the greenhouse, the heat, it was still a little bit soft, and so I put a hairdryer in there to be more direct than that box fan, get it right up underneath the pumpkin. I had duct taped it onto cold, so it was blowing cool air, and I had it kind of directed up where I thought the most damage was. Well, you know, in that peak of the pontoon, the way it was growing, What I didn't see was at the very top of that was where I hadn't seen some rodent damage, and that's where I lost it. It was really, to baby it and nurse it, and then, to
pull out
not
all the
even
stops
find
to
it.
try to save it. It just,
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
those
And it
last,
was on,
last steps, or that, that last clinging on to the emotion of it all. Like, come on, we can save
well,
you. And
it got worse. It got
worse.
worse. And this thing was on a world record pace. It was the biggest thing I'd ever grown to that date. So I get underneath of it a few days later, and I'm looking at it, and I see what looks like a blowout. And so I'm not going to stick my hand in what is, very clearly pumpkin rot, because nothing stinks worse than rotten pumpkin. And so I cut it off the vine. I hook it up to the tractor. I pull it out of the side of the greenhouse, and then I put a hole in it because, I'm going to save the seeds. It did not go down from its own problem. It went down because of mice. I figured those are going to be good seeds and worth growing, because it was a really strong grower, good color. When I pulled that thing out and I opened it up and started harvesting the seeds, it was as fresh as can be. It did not go through the mice did not, it wasn't totally rotten. And so then my heart was broken again, because maybe I could have saved it. It looked from underneath like a blowout, like just rotten, had blown out. And oh my gosh.
Again too, that to find out, to come all the way back around and find out that it could have been saved. That's even more heartbreaking.
Maybe I'll never know.
But again, like you said, hopefully you've collected some pretty good genetics from it, and and can continue growing that and do that. That'd be my next question though too, is that sort of that's what you guys are really just kind of saving and carrying on genetics of the best kind of vegetables you're getting from year to years. That's pretty much what you're doing with the next year's grow and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's what we try to do. This time of year,
each other, that sort of stuff,
we
kind of
do.
thing as well. Yeah.
Yeah, there are websites, databases full of giant pumpkin, giant squash, giant tomato, giant anything genetics. And we do research to see, how heavy they were, not just how much they weighed, but how much over the estimated weight, how thick the walls are. That insinuates those fruits were. And then what people who aren't involved in the community often don't realize is what a big community it is, the giant pumpkin community. And because of the internet now, we all know each other, and not only through, online and going to weigh-offs, but the Great Pumpkin Commonwealth also has like a worldwide standings that we keep, and then honors those growers who are the best in the world at their annual convention, the International Growers Convention, also known as the Big Show, which moves to a different location all over the world. Last year it was in Danvers, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. And this coming year, I'm super excited. It's going to be in Belgium. So that'll be a really good opportunity to see growers and swap seeds with them. But then also there are pumpkin clubs all over the world. And these clubs petition the growers to send them at the end of the season their best seeds. And then throughout the winter, when we giant pumpkin growers have nothing better to do, there are online seed auctions on this website called bigpumpkins.com. And the clubs put these auctions on, and they're selling seeds that we growers have donated from all over the world. They're selling them, and those proceeds go to help that club's weigh-off. And so, it's a good way to give back to the community by donating your seeds to these pumpkin clubs. And it's a good way, to obtain seeds all
Yeah.
over the world with the best genetics you can find, buying them through one of those auctions.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because really, that's the purpose in the long run, right? Is that, you're not in it to grow, this second largest pumpkin in the world, right? I mean, when you're starting your season, you want to grow the largest pumpkin in the world. So making sure you're
Absolutely.
obtaining you're obtaining those best seeds is the best way to get that accomplished. So I'm sure everybody is on the lookout every year. And which kind of brings me to the fact that we were talking with one of our guests the other week, gardener Scott Wilson, and talking about the record was broken this year though too for the giant pumpkin, right?
Yes.
Trying to remember, was this the competition at Half Moon Bay?
That's right. It was, that's my favorite weigh off, the Half Moon Bay World Championship weigh off, sponsored by Safeway. I didn't go this year. I tried to talk them into allowing giant squash, but they are strictly giant pumpkins. And so I normally go every year since I've won that. And with the squash, it didn't make sense, and the price of gasoline to go. But a friend of mine named Travis Ginger from Minnesota, he ended up winning that and breaking the world record, which had been previously held by an Italian grower. And so Travis broke it with a 2,749 pound pumpkin.
2,749. I believe the name of the pumpkin was Michael Jordan, right? Did I have that right?
Correct.
Michael Jordan?
Because Michael Jordan was, number 23 for the Bulls, and it's 2023.
Oh yeah, there you go. That makes sense.
Uh-huh.
I was just thinking greatest of all time type of thing.
Well, there's that too.
23, but there you go. That makes total sense. Right on, right on. So that's really cool that, to see that sort of thing. But then again, too, now it just makes, takes the stakes even higher for next year, right?
That's right. I'm sure Travis is going to be on a speaker's tour. A lot of these clubs in the springtime have growers meetings. I know when I had some really big years, I get flown here and there to speak. I'm sure he's going to be doing that quite a few times. And that gets all of us really hyped up and ready for the coming season. This winter, that's the time, at least for me, to really do some research and set some goals for myself and procure the best seeds in the world that I can find.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully you can get some from that pumpkin then, right? Nudge, send me some over.
That's something to think about, as a grower. I generally like to grow half my patch proven seeds that were grown out the previous year, and I know they're proven performers, and then half the patch potential seeds. In other words, seeds that came from pumpkins from this season, and they haven't grown anything yet. And so that's kind of a wild card. But they're from the latest and greatest genetic crosses. And so I kind of hedge my bets a little bit by doing half and half.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good idea too, especially if you got the space and all of that. I know Jay was asking just a little bit ago, and I want to kind of touch on this too. So you've grown out this pumpkin, it's gone to competition. What kind of happens to these big giants afterwards?
That's a great question.
Zoos, or do you I know there's one competition, I don't know if it's really a competition, right? They carve them out, make boats out of them. They got something here in Oregon, they do that as well too. So
I had one of my pumpkins. I grew one for all of your people who are watching who are truly urban gardeners with limited space. There is a contest called the 150 square foot challenge. And
Okay.
so you have to grow the biggest pumpkin you can in 150 square feet. And I did grow a pumpkin in a 6 by 22 foot area, and it got
Yeah.
to, you know, I think it was about 750 pounds.
Ooh,
Um,
wow.
and so it went to that Oregon Way Off. It's called Terminator in Tualatin, Oregon. And
Oh,
then it became a boat. I didn't row it because I was doing some speaking at the New York Botanical Gardens. But the Japanese champion, the Japanese giant pumpkin champion, always gets a trip to that Terminator
oh, right
Oregon
on.
Way Off and regatta. And so he got to row my pumpkin, which I think 700 to 750 pounds is like the perfect size for a pumpkin boat. So yeah, people
Yeah.
do that with them. They race them in regattas. There are a handful of them. I want to say 4 or 5 around the world, and
Okay.
Oregon being the closest one to me. A lot of times after a way off, the event hosting the way off will keep the top 3 to 5 pumpkins for display. So my big squash down in Oregon stayed on display at Bauman Farms. My big pumpkin in Washington stayed on display at Carpenito Farms, and both of those places have lots of the public coming through. They've got corn mazes and giant pumpkin you pick
Yeah.
patches. So,
Yeah.
you know, having a giant pumpkin or squash there is great for them. But then those venues that don't keep the pumpkins, a lot of times I'm able to sell my pumpkin. I have a couple friends who are actually pumpkin brokers who will
Oh,
sell my pumpkin for me. Because
there you
there
go.
are
Wow.
places that want giant pumpkins for carving and display,
Yeah,
businesses.
that
Yeah.
makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Just as like you're talking with the Carpenito brothers, it's it's an attraction, I guess, which I know
Yeah.
I used to live in the Kent area there of Washington for many
Oh,
years.
yeah.
So I know Carpenito brothers very well, and all their pumpkin patches and all of that too. So we
Right.
used to go it's where we used to go for the kids and all of that for
I'm
yeah.
so glad I was able to. How they ended up having a way off was they had bought one of my pumpkins for display, and I this was a few years ago, I think 3 or 4 years ago, and I said, if you had your own way off, and you guys have a great farm to do that, you
Yeah.
can, instead of buying one pumpkin, you can just keep as many of those winning pumpkins as you want, as the event sponsor.
Mhm.
So I kind of talked them into that. And a couple of years later, that's Washington's biggest and best way off now.
Yeah, yeah. Perfect location for it too, because they're basically a big urban farm. You really think
Yeah.
about because of where they're located and all of that around just the King County area there.
Yeah,
But
I just flew out to New York
wow.
Botanical Gardens to give a giant pumpkin talk with the GPC weekend before last. And when I took off, my plane flew over Carpenitos, and I could see the pumpkin patches, and I could
Yeah.
see where my giant pumpkin was from the plane. I mean, it's just right off the I-5 corridor
Yep.
there.
Yeah, yeah, just exactly like you're saying, just like you fly right in and they've got all of they're pretty much those big spaces right there where you can see the farming kind of land that's right there in the South King County area there. So I'm sure there's a really great view of that. But yeah, that's really awesome though, to kind of have talked them into creating a pumpkin way off and see where that competition is today and all of that. That's wonderful. So real quick, let's dig back a little bit and talk about how did you get all started in this whole giant pumpkin growing business? I mean, this is quite a venture for anybody to take on.
Well, I'm competitive by nature. Anybody who knows
Yeah.
me for maybe more than 10 minutes figures that out. And even as a kid, I just really was into winning, whether it was trying to win the spelling bee or whatever. I just always
Yeah.
wanted to be the best. And I showed horses and, really wanted to always win when I was a little kid at the fair. And When my parents bought some property, I think when I was in kindergarten, it had been a old dairy farm, and that first garden they put in just absolutely exploded, probably because of years and years of composted cow manure.
Right.
And
For sure.
it looked like the Miracle Grow test garden. It was just gorgeous. Everything was big. And my dad had planted some Big Macs pumpkins, and they were huge. They probably weren't as big as,
Right.
I mean, they probably weren't that huge, but I was in kindergarten, so they looked
That's
huge to
right.
me. They were probably, between 150 and 175 pounds, which is pretty large. And I just thought they were the biggest pumpkins in the world, and we were the big winners. And Dad's like, no, I'll take you to the Puyallup Fair and show you the big pumpkins. So he did, and I just remember being absolutely that I knew as soon as I saw those, I knew I was going to do that someday. And so I held on to that dream for years and years and years until I was graduating from college. I lived with my aunt and uncle at the time while I was in college, and they had a big horse facility. And behind the barn, there was a huge manure pile. And so on the back end of the manure pile, where it was all aged out and fairly composted, I had planted my first giant pumpkin seed. And so I think I was 22 years old. And so that very first pumpkin I grew, this was before the world had even seen 1,000-pound pumpkin. But it grew to, I think, 579 pounds. So I took it to a weigh-off, which was not easy to find a weigh-off back then, because this was before the internet and I didn't have any connections to giant pumpkin growers. But one way or another, I found a weigh-off, and I was hooked. But I graduated from college. My aunt and uncle sold the farm, and then I had to get a job. And so giant pumpkins, even though they were in my heart, I just didn't have a place to grow them for a number of years. And so I remember when it was finally time to get my own house, that was, in my mind, the number one prerequisite. I needed to have full sun and good soil so that I could finally grow my giant pumpkins.
Right on. And that's great too. And you finally were able to do that, and growing some really huge pumpkins today. And not only that, as well too, you also teach too. You're a teacher as well, right?
Yeah, I've been teaching third grade for 27 years at the same school. In fact, it's the school that I went to elementary school at, East Olympia Elementary. And it was always my dream as a kid to teach there. All of us kids back then, we went to school in this little building. There were about 100 of us in the whole school. The school building was built in 1916. It was just beautiful. All of us were generally farm kids. And it was just such a fun, loving time in my life. I always wanted to go back and give back to that community that loved and supported me so much. And so when I finally went back to East Olympia as a student teacher, I wanted nothing more than to get a job there. And so during my student teaching, I worked really hard. I had a 5th grade class, and we had a plants unit, which, I love plants. And so I asked the principal if I could work with the PTO and work with the community and maybe build a couple raised bed garden boxes so that, we don't just throw these plants out that we had worked on. And so she was very supportive of that. Well, it ended up, just because of the support of the PTO, my principal, the community, and the parents that I was working with that year, I ended up building a 22-bed raised bed garden.
Oh, wow.
My dad helped me build a greenhouse and a shed. And I mean, it was just, and it to this day, it's just a stunning garden, and the kids absolutely love it. And But
Yeah.
that's what got me hired at that school was, I think,
Yeah.
going above and beyond like that and showing that I can work with the community and all these different stakeholders and get something like that built for our community. And so the kids to this day, they just love going out in the garden, and I love nothing more than to take them out there.
Wow. That's amazing. That's actually even better of a story than what I was hoping to get with the question, because I was really kind of like looking to like do a little roundabout and get into talking about, how inspiring it must be to these young kids that you're teaching, that you're growing these giants, and maybe one of them, but you really, really built a whole experience and career out of starting a garden and really inspiring these kids again still to this day, not just in growing giants like you do and all of that, but they're out there really growing their own things in this teaching garden
They
that you've
are.
built. That's amazing.
One of the highlights of their year this year, these third graders, was making what we called harvest stew. And so I brought in and borrowed a bunch of crock pots, and the kids went out and picked all the veggies from the garden, and we washed them and chopped them and filled our crock pots, and then they feasted, and they just thought that was the greatest thing. And these kids who generally, won't touch vegetables at home were just eating it up. Yeah. And so they love that. And they it's kind of funny because, aside from the school garden and working out there, it's funny because they think I'm famous. You can Google my name and,
right.
There's all these pictures of me either on my horse or mostly with standing on a giant pumpkin. And so they think they're teachers, some superstar.
That's great though, again too. So, which, again becomes that inspiration for young kids, seeing that sort of stuff and having that sort of experience. And then again too, more so than just the giant vegetables, you've got these, garden beds and this influence you've built right out of their school. And it's one of the things that we talk about all the time whenever I'm interviewing somebody who's a gardening educator and all of that, is that understanding and seeing kids, as you talked about, who don't normally touch vegetables at home. It's, they got more of that, American processed diet going on. And when they see vegetables and get to experience, the growing process and handle them or harvest them even, really works. But, getting that experience of growing them. So, I think it's, Ron Finley, who said, kids who grow tomatoes eat tomatoes. So, and it goes for anything, you give them that hands-on experience, and that changes, really, it can really change how they see their own diets from a very young age too. So that's really inspiring to hear about at your school.
Well, and it, aside from the growing and eating of vegetables, just getting out there and having them work on something other than, at their desk on a piece of paper is valuable. And it really builds a lot of teamwork. It builds a lot of camaraderie in our classroom. Like last year's class, the school garden honestly went into major disrepair over COVID. I wasn't there. No one could go there. It got totally taken over by weeds. So my class last year, we worked really hard to rebuild the garden. And so they were out there physically sawing wood, screwing beds together, with 2x12s, carrying these in little teams off my flatbed trailer, these giant pieces of lumber, into the garden. And so it just fosters a real sense of community within our classroom. And for them to give back to the greater community gives them a lot of pride. And that's really important for kids to feel like they're contributing to something bigger than themselves.
Really invested in it with their own work, and, they're that experience too, you know. So yeah, exactly. And that's really cool to see too. And the, you know, the rebuilding and that sort of process, making it even more work. So they, again too, they'll look back on that, you know, and see that, and that'll be some sort of, those will also be memories that they'll carry as well too, you know,
Oh,
those sort of
absolutely. Yeah.
everything, which is really awesome. Again too, and that sort of sense of experience can carry on a lifetime of changes and certain things, and how, again, you know, again too, I think, you know, especially for kids, you know, is learning that you know, more about food and where it comes from and all that sort of stuff becomes a lot more important, especially in gardening. But
Well, and you got
yeah,
to think, that's when I got my start, and that's when it bit me, when I was in kindergarten and I saw those big pumpkins. And so
yeah,
you can never underestimate how something like that is going to affect a kid.
exactly. You know, and then in also too, again, the outdoor experience as well, you know, bringing that in as well, because any adult who's out gardening and growing knows that we get also that sort of, you know, that sort of experience of you know, kind of relief from the world kind of thing, you know, and by being outdoors and working in the soil and growing things and taking that sort of, you know, that sort of thing as well. And that works as well for kids as well too, and really is kind of important for them, especially at their age, to be influenced by that. And it's great to hear that you have that going on as well too. Again, I think that story is just awesome. You know, a lot more, yeah, a lot more than what I was thinking I was gonna get there, but, again, too, I'm sure that, they are really influenced also by the big giant pumpkins, though, too. So, like you said, they think of you as this famous giant pumpkin grower.
Yeah, I've had a number of radio interviews and newspaper articles this year, and so
Yeah,
um, it's a lot of fun for them to see that, and
yeah,
hear about my way off results and my world standings this year.
yeah,
They're my number one fans, and it's just a lot of fun to share that with them. Um, it helps, to it's just a way for them to recognize me, as their teacher,
yeah,
that's my identity with them and what makes me special to them.
yeah,
And it's a fun thing. It's just funny. Giant pumpkins
yeah,
are, I mean,
exactly.
there's a lot of money involved, a lot of work, but they're
Yeah.
just funny. Why do we do this? I don't know. They're just
Well,
fun
one of
and
the
funny, and
Yeah, and I guess, you know, one of the things too, you know, as you said, is that you got that competitive nature as well. So it's got to be in a, you know, one of your outlets for that. You know, I know that you
yeah.
also, you know, and I'm sure it's something the kids also kind of adore, think about you as well too, is you also do have a show horse as well, right? So you're doing those sort of competitions as well.
Right. Yeah, I've got a couple horses that I showed. And actually, when I first started doing the giant pumpkins competitively, taking to weigh-offs, I was not that competitive. And I was just doing it for fun, just to see how big of a pumpkin I could get. And I realized, because I was so invested in the show horses, um, and I mean, almost to the point of just being obsessed and overtraining them, which you don't want to do, because that's a living, breathing animal, and you don't want to hurt the animal
Yeah.
by overtraining. I realized, well, maybe I could, this pumpkin thing is good. It's getting me out of the barn a little bit and letting me branch out and have another interest over summer break, that
Yeah.
it's good for me to not be so obsessed with winning at the horse show.
All right.
And after, I want to say, 5 years of growing pumpkins for fun, reasonably big, several hundred pounds up to 1,000 pounds, I thought, if I put in as much, effort and enthusiasm with these pumpkins as I do with the horses, why can't I be one of the best pumpkin growers around, like I'm with the horses? I'm super competitive with the horses.
Yeah.
What would happen if I had that much enthusiasm with the pumpkins? And I kind of really had to examine myself and my energy level and my pocketbook, frankly. Do I have the resources, the time, the energy, the money, the willingness to invest that much? Do I have enough within myself to invest that much? Because when I do something, I go all in, 110% on it. And so I kind of had to really, wonder, can I burn the candle at both ends? And yes, I can. So,
you can.
I'm
You've been doing that
110%
now.
for several years. Yeah. And so I've probably been, clawing my way up the top with the giant pumpkins the last 6 or 7 years. I have been very serious about it, trying to be the best in the world, at one thing or another, whether it's Master Gardener or Biggest Squash or, winning a premier way off like Half Moon Bay. That's been just probably, I think, the last 7 years. And so, so I have the capacity to do that. And it's a lot, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah. I mean, when you get to do so many things that are so fun and exciting in a sense too, and also be able to have that outlet for that competitive nature, be able to, do some really fun things. And again, too, as well as, being able to influence these kids and all that sort of stuff is just really, really awesome, all together, really fun to follow along with all of what you do too, as someone who got into and was researching and looking into giant pumpkin growers. I'm sure that's where I found you as a friend years ago, and it's been kind of fun to follow along and watch all of that. So again, so here you are, you've met some of these goals and stuff. So what are some of the future goals, or are these some things you're still thinking about, or where are you heading to for this next year?
So last year, I set all those squash goals, and in order for me, goal setting is such an important part of being a giant pumpkin grower, a competitive giant pumpkin grower. And goal setting is so important for every aspect of my life, really. And so this time of year, I really start thinking about goals, embracing them, trying to cultivate them. And so I think about the goal and then what do I need to do to achieve that. Last year, I'd set some things up with my goals that I'm going to continue. I thought that it would be very important last year, if I wanted to be the #1 squash grower in the world, that I needed a greater sphere of influence. I needed to collaborate with some of the other top growers more consistently. I'm so busy with my career and with the horses, and now hiking has kind of taken on a big part of my life too. And then the giants, that I needed to make sure I planned for that. And so all last year, I met with a group collaboratively, and we really did a great job of brainstorming and running ideas back and forth with each other, planning, just saying what our methods were, and then hearing about their methods, opened up some new ideas for me. And so continuing that collaboration is going to be really important for this coming 2024 season. But next year, I think I'm going to go back to the giant pumpkins. I've spent the last couple of years really focused on the squash, and frankly, the pumpkins, they get bigger.
That's right.
I like bigger. So maybe instead of 3 squash and 1 pumpkin, I'll do 3 pumpkins and 1 squash. Maybe 4 pumpkins. I haven't quite decided on my seeds yet. Maybe I'll go back to growing 6 plants. These coming weeks, that's when I'm going to be doing my seed research and trying to procure some seeds. But as far as my goal, I'd love to get back that Washington State pumpkin record. So I've got to be over 2,300 pounds to do that. And that's not going to be easy. So in order to do that, I think, well, what do I need? I'm going to continue that collaborative networking that I started last year. I'm going to work on composting this year. And so with the horses, they give me like an endless supply of manure. That's a good thing. But I've been really lazy through the years turning that. I've got a tractor. I need to just quit having excuses and get out there and turn it every week. And I've been doing that for the last 2 weeks, and I'm starting to see results there. And then I think I'm going to try.
That's pretty much
and
your goal right there. So you gotta get that right.
It is. Absolutely. I'm going to try at least in one patch, if not all patches. We'll see how feasible it is, but I'd like to try no-till this year. I was really careful when I took the plants out of the greenhouses. I grow right now in 24 by 48 foot enclosures, and I bring the sides up in the summer, and they're basically like a not really a greenhouse per se, more like a I'm trying to think of the word.
A high tunnel or
high
something.
Tunnel. Yes, a high tunnel. That's the word I mean. Yeah, they're like a high tunnel in the summer, because in the spring and in the fall I can close them up, but in the summer they're fairly open. But anyway, I was super careful during the harvest to not compact that soil. And then I've got my winter rye all sprouted. It's about 6 inches tall right now. And so I've got a good cover crop growing to keep that mycorrhizae, network going and alive in the soil over the winter. And then I'm going to all winter long try to do my research into how I can best take care of that soil in order to, increase the good, nematodes, bacteria, and I think it all comes down to the soil, all that biology. This year I paid more attention to soil biology than I ever have, and I backed off on my watering and increased what I was giving as far as beneficials, and I had the best roots I've ever seen on those plants. And so I'm going to continue to research about that and try to do no-till and see if.
Yeah, and I saw on one of your videos for your channel too. If anybody wants to see like how Cindy gets her plant started and all of that too, you did some videos this year on your YouTube channel. So I got a link down below in the description that people can go check that out as well too, if you want to see how that all goes. But I did see one of those videos that you use compost tea.
Yeah. I like compost tea. I like it, because I was rototilling and disrupting the soil and using a lot of salt fertilizers, through my drip lines. I was trying to think, how can I back off on these salts and help the soil, help the pumpkin, instead of me just throwing, this free meal at them all the time.
Exactly.
And so I tried to use more compost tea last year. And I think that seemed to improve the tilth of my dirt. I was talking to a really great, smart tomato grower about the compost tea, and he suggested, compost tea is a good thing, but he's kind of got me thinking more about it. His feeling was that if you use too much of it, then that can throw some things off balance. And so I'm going to see if the cover cropping and the no-till just not being so disruptive to my soil. Maybe I won't need as much compost tea as I've had in the past.
Right. Yeah, that kind of makes sense though too, just kind of, I mean, in a sense again too, what you're doing is you're just feeding. And really, I guess in the goal of like developing soil biology is you're really just trying to create the whatever those, biological communities that are needed within the soil to have their own balance. And so if you're just
Right.
whatever it is you're feeding, you can be again disrupting that balance because yeah, and it just makes a lot of
Yeah. If
sense.
I'm feeding the biology myself, then
Yeah,
they're not perhaps forming that symbiotic relationship with the roots, getting the exudes from the roots and, trading the nutrients that the plant needs. And so, I mean,
right.
that makes sense to me, what he said, that perhaps, by giving the biology, the bacteria, the carbohydrates they want, by me giving it to them, they're
Yeah,
not getting it perhaps from my plants.
right. Yeah, so much to go into that stuff, but it really, I think, ultimately is the better way to go when it comes to it. I mean, it's one of the things that I started when I started gardening was practicing organic methods and learning about those as well too. And and it all really comes down to the soil. What we're really trying to do, is build that soil that's, as long as our soil's thriving, then our plants can thrive. And at that point, because then we're giving them everything that they naturally need. And so really in the long run, as long as we're just feeding the soil some good, organic material, I mean, I guess in a sense, you probably want to build it too. There's some people who probably are starting off with some really rough soil and probably need to build it up a little bit and probably need those compost teas a little bit more until it's established.
Right.
Their soil's looking good.
Yeah,
But once you've built it, once you've set it up, it should work on its own pretty much, right?
I would think so.
As long as
And
you're
from
just
what
as
I've
long as you're
heard,
living those
if you're really
boundaries.
active, yeah, if you're really active in building it, it takes a good 3 years, from what I understand, to get that,
Yeah.
what you're looking for. And ultimately, once you have it there, the word on the street is, and I'll admit I'm not there, but I'm working on it. But the word on the street is that you will have way less weed pressure. The tilth will be very light. And your plants will be fairly disease and insect resistant. And
Exactly.
so I'm all for that. So I would say last year probably was my first year really, really being cognizant of taking care of the soil, not so much the
Yeah,
plants. I figure if I take care of the soil will take care of the plant.
that's
And
right.
so this coming year, I'm going to do even more. And so that'll be my year 2. And if it takes year 3, then, and maybe if I'm really committed to it and I'm turning my compost, my manure pile, like I plan to, since that's my big goal, maybe I can cut that 3 years down to 2. Fingers
Yeah, yeah,
crossed.
hopefully so, right? If not, I
Yeah.
mean, you I'm sure you're gonna be able to, grow some pretty nice, pumpkins anyways. I mean, with the experience and everything you already got there. But, yeah, that's just that's just pretty, amazing again too about what you're able to accomplish with growing all that sort of stuff and again too building a great organic situation as well too to do it. So it'd be really interesting to watch you continue on this adventure of growing all of these really awesome giants in your garden. And
Yeah, I'm super excited. I'm probably going to do some testing over the winter. Last year, I got some LED grow lights that were, I think, a real game changer for me. The weed giant pumpkin growers can learn so much from the marijuana growers. Actually, a good grower is a good grower, and
right,
I have noticed a lot of these growers coming into the fold of the giant pumpkin community, and they've got some great skills. They've got a lot of research behind what they're doing. And so and so much of that is online and on YouTube. It's really a great time to be a grower because there's just so much information out there. But
Yeah.
I'll probably
And
be
again,
spending a
too,
lot of
the
my
same
winter with
thing with
my
those.
LEDs.
Yeah, and again, too, another same thing with a lot of the marijuana growers as well, too. Again, these people have created and gotten growing down to a science in a sense. And one of the things you
Yeah,
saw over the development of their science too was coming back to the idea of soil development as well, too. So a lot, a lot of them know and know about really focusing in on, good organic soil biology, to make even those plants thrive.
absolutely. Yeah. And so, yeah, I've got a couple great sponsors myself, BE Organics, and that's all about adding to the soil, and
Yeah.
building that up, and then my chilled LEDs. Also, I'll be experimenting with that. I think one thing, we were talking a little bit about goals too,
Yeah.
and one thing that I did not pay very good attention to last year because I was kind of on the fence about it, but I kind of think that it bit me a little bit was moon phase. I don't know what you think about moon phase gardening. A lot of people think it's kind of woo woo, but the moon, it controls the tides. And so it's got to
Yeah.
control, the moisture in the soil and so forth. And I know a bunch of us, we all were just raring to go. Yeah, we got all of our equipment out, to start these seeds. And then we
Yeah.
had a buddy who, he was just like, yeah, I'm going to wait a week and a half longer. And we're just like, we're going for it. And
Yeah.
anyways, we had such a hard time. And we're among some of the best growers in the world, those of us who started early.
Right.
And I've got like the best LEDs money could buy with these childs, and my methods are down, but things were just really sluggish germinating for me. And
Yeah.
these other grower friends of mine who had started at the same time, well, our buddy who was like almost a week and a half later, just up like that, and then he ended up having one of the biggest pumpkins in the world this year. And
Wow.
when I went back, I wonder if it had something to do with the moon phase, because he
Mm.
was totally in a favorable moon phase. And before I planted, I looked at that and I thought, that's
Exactly. Right.
not. But I mean, his just popped right up, and I mean, one of the biggest pumpkins in the world, and not the most favorable climate. And the rest of us, I know we know what we're doing. So I
Maybe
think there
there
is
is
something to do with
something
that.
to it. Yeah, maybe there
I
is
really
something to
think
do
there
with
is.
it, and it does make a lot of sense. It's all kind of a part of the natural order of things,
Yeah,
in a sense, like you're
but I'm going
saying,
to
the
test
moon
it
affects
this
the
winter.
tides.
I'm going to test it this winter. I'm going to do some trials. The previous year, I'd done some test trials of different potting mixes, starting mixes.
Okay.
And I measured, the plants, the time to germination. I measured their root mass. And that was a very valuable time in the winter for me to do that. But this year, I think I'm going to test whether or not and how the moon phase affects germination.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see because I've heard people talk about it. I've never really looked into it to really kind of understand it all, and I'm probably going to end up doing that this afternoon too. Is that because it does sound interesting, and again too, like you said, it really is the moon has its effects on the whatever is going on, tides and possibly other things. So, it makes sense that, in some way that would affect the gardening and the growing of things as well, too.
I would think so. If it can pull the ocean water, surely it's, percolating water in the soil, and other things that I'm not even aware of. But that really got me thinking last year, for him being a week and a half behind us, to completely catch up and then overtake us. You know, it's got to be something to
see
it.
here. I got a question that's come in here. Jennifer asks, let's see here. Question: what company does Cindy use for testing her soil? Do you do like some soil testing or
I
anything like
do, yeah. I do soil testing in the spring, late winter, early spring, usually February. And I also use this same company for tissue testing during the season. I send pumpkin leaf stalks and petioles. And I use Western Labs out of Parma, Idaho, and they've got a great website. So if you Google Western Labs in Idaho, and then click on submission forms, you'll find their tissue and soil testing forms online.
Oh, right on. Excellent, excellent. And I think Nancy was asking earlier, we kind of touched on a little bit about what we were doing with the pumpkins after they were growing, but she was asking again too something about was wondering, are they like edible? Can you use them for food or soup or anything like that?
You know, that's a great question. I get that one a lot. You can eat them, and I do not use like systemic pesticides when I'm growing mine. I use contact pesticides that are, you know, labeled for cucurbits, including pumpkins. And so I would feel safe eating them. However, a lot of people use systemics, particularly people in the Midwest and back east who have to deal with those dreaded squash vine borers. And so I would,
Right.
you know, maybe not want to eat something that was grown like that. However, a lot of people will feed them to livestock. Some of our pumpkins that go to the giant pumpkin way off in the Seattle area, they feed those pumpkins to a dairy after the event, and they get tapped for beer for this huge celebration at Elysian Brewery, and then they get fed to the dairy cows near Seattle, Auburn area. But some of my friends take theirs to the zoo, like the Oregon Zoo.
Right.
I feed mine if I don't sell them, or maybe even after I get them back from a way off display, I give them to my horses. They like to eat them. I have cooked with giant pumpkin before. It tastes fine. It kind of tastes like normal pumpkin, but the cells are just genetically predisposed to gorge themselves on water, and so the texture is off. It's my pumpkin
Right.
pie. No one ate it because it was so watery.
Just like Jello, probably, right?
Yeah, it tasted
Yeah.
fine. It just didn't look great.
Right, right. That makes a lot of sense too. That's kind of what I was going to say. I'd imagine that they grow a lot bigger, so again, the texture would be different. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of what I would expect too. You know, is that and I've heard of places giving those pumpkins to like zoos and places like that. That it really, in the long run, that they are best as like animal food, especially large animal food.
Yeah, the elephants
Real.
at the Oregon Zoo love to smash them and kick them around and then eat them.
Yeah, just like, yeah, a fun game and a treat and everything as well too for him as well. But yeah, well, awesome, Cindy. Really, you know, I don't want to keep you too much longer. Just such a really great conversation and learning all about growing giant pumpkins and hearing all about your, you know, your stories of doing that. And again, too, I was just really enjoying as you were talking about things that you're experimenting with and you're doing and you're working on goals and all of that sort of thing too. You know, I hope that you make some videos and continue to share that process with everybody. I think you do a really good job at it. And from what I can tell from the videos that I've seen, people are really enjoying it and you're getting some good views. So
Yeah,
hope to
I
see
was
some more
hoping that
stories
I
there.
could inspire some new growers. Those videos last year that I made, a handful of them were to try to get brand new
Yeah.
pumpkin growers off on the right foot. And hopefully I was able to do that a little bit.
Excellent. And I'll also mention, you kind of inspired me because I didn't know that they had that, what was it, 150 square foot competition or whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be looking into that because I might fit that category pretty well and see what I can do. I don't know about getting up into like, what would you say you got 700 pounds, but I
I
don't know.
did. Yeah. I was
Maybe I'll give it a
10th
shot.
in the world in that competition. And the guy who won it, Chris Rodabaugh, he had a 1,200 and some odd pounder.
Oh, wow.
And so you can grow a big pumpkin in a small space. It is possible.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to see what I'm gonna give. I might give it a try and have to check it out. That's for sure. But again, too, I want to thank you for joining us, and I encourage anybody else who is joining in with us and watching here our interview with Cindy Tobeck to get down in the description below. I have a link to that YouTube channel, and you can watch and check out all of her growing tips and things that you do when you're growing your giant pumpkins. And again, thanks for joining with us, Cindy. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Enoch. And I want to give another quick shout out to the Great Pumpkin Commonwealth. If you haven't been to that website, go to www.gpc1, like the number 1.org. I produce a newsletter, and I'd love to have you sign up for it. We cover all kinds of giant things, not just giant pumpkins. And it's a great resource for anyone who wants to learn more about giant pumpkins, giant fruits and vegetables, or how to improve your soil and all aspects of gardening.
Awesome. So that's www.gpc1.org. And what I'll do is I'll
newsletter. Yeah, /newsletter. Or you'll just find the link for the newsletter.
Yeah, I'll try to put a link right after the show right down in the description below too. So if anybody's watching here, I'll have a link down there in just a few. In fact, I'm sure that Jay in the comments, if anybody's watching now, is probably putting a link in here as we're finishing up the show.
Perfect.
Too. So awesome, Cindy. Great. Thank you so much for joining with us. It's been a great conversation with you. And again, you take care. Have a great day. And we look forward to seeing what you got growing on this next year.
Bye. Thank you.
Hey gardeners, thanks for tuning in to our show today. We'll be right back at it here in just a moment. I just wanted to take a second here to highlight our regular videos and features here on the Urban Gardener channel. Our weekly garden journals, and our incredible featured visits.
So, all right. What an awesome, fun conversation there with Cindy Tobeck, master of giants, grower of big giant pumpkins and all sorts of other things as well. She's grown in the past, like she mentioned there in the conversation. When I was first watching and following along with her, she was growing in this master gardener competition, growing these big long gourds and big giant tomatoes and all sorts of other things as well too. So just some really fun things. And I'm gonna have to check out that 150 square foot thing competition that she was talking about there. Again, it would be fun to do it. I don't know, I mean, I've grown 132 pounds, as big as the biggest pumpkin, although I'm sure that plant was going to produce an even larger one that I had to give up because it broke off of the vine. So I ended up growing the secondary pumpkin off of that one. So I don't know, maybe we get a couple 100 pounds, but we'll see. Maybe we'll check into doing something like that in our gardens for next year. But yeah, those are always really fun to see. They're really like when you go to the local fairs, our county fair or state fairs and other places as well that hold their own separate competitions. It's always fun to kind of watch and see the weigh-offs and how big some of these pumpkins are too, especially when you see them in real life. They are just huge and enormous, and really, again, too, takes so much effort to be able to grow something like that as well too. I was in this competition again that had a category for growing the largest squash in there. And that was one of the things too that kind of got me onto that designation between growing a squash and a pumpkin. So when I was in this competition, I was looking at squash because I knew there was a difference. Turns out they were actually just talking about squash or pumpkins for the whole total category. You could grow either one, but yeah, I ended up reaching out to Cindy, and she was kind enough to send me seeds that I was able to use to try to grow in that competition. And again, too, as the story goes, competition didn't really go all the way. We didn't really end up growing those out as I was planning to, but maybe I'll have to send away for some more seeds from Cindy again for that other competition and see what we can grow this next year in our alleyway, because it'll definitely fit the category of that other competition. But yeah, again, really awesome. So glad to see all of you here. And thank you so much for joining with us and taking part in our conversation with Cindy there. And thanks for asking some really awesome questions too as well. And if you are here at this point of the show, again, I want to ask you to hit the thumbs up button, hit the like button there, and as well the subscribe button. If you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, you need to do that so that you can follow along with all of our fun garden adventures here on the Urban Gardener channel, as well as here every Saturday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time for the Let's Get Growing show. And always love to have you here. You can also check us out at letsgetgrowing.live. And also, I want to, at the end of the show here too, is encourage you as well again to go down into the description below for a link to our Facebook group, the Let's Get Growing group. It's a really great gardening community where we got some really awesome gardeners there who can either help you out with your garden, or other gardeners who might need some help with their garden. You can help them figure out and grow the best that they can grow in their gardens through our gardening community. And as I like to always tell you too, is a great thing about being a part of that community is that it gives you the opportunity to share your gardens with not just everybody else who's in our gardening community, but me as well, because again, it's my opportunity to be able to see your gardens is in our Facebook group there. And we share all of my gardens and all the different things that we've got growing on here on the Urban Gardener channel. So it's always awesome to be able to see what you all have growing on as well. So again, join our Facebook Let's Get Growing group, and follow all of our links down below in the description. And again, to check out Cindy Tobeck's YouTube channel there, as well as, again, to put a link in the description here just as soon as I'm done here for the GPC group there as well too, for you can catch her newsletter on all the things that they have growing on there as well. All right. So again, really awesome to have all of you with us, and be sure to share our show with everybody, and we'll see all of you this next week.